Hello, pushers. This is episode 36 of Pushing Cardboard, the amazing art of Rodger MacGowan and Bonaparte's Eastern Empire. I'll take a long, loving look at Rodger MacGowan's coffee table art book come autobiography. I've been a big fan of RBM since Squad Leader, and he remains my all-time favorite wargame artist, so don't expect an unbiased review, at least not of the art. The book, maybe. And then I'll dive into the game Andy Rourke and I discussed last episode, Bonaparte's Eastern Empire. I hope this one catches on. It has some fresh mechanics. And then, of course, we'll have some news, some new games, and all the usual chatter. As always, this episode of Pushing Cardboard is sponsored by Noble Knight Games. If there's a game you need, they've got it. One of the first games I found through them was the S&T magazine version of The Plot to Assassinate Hitler. It's a game I'd always heard was interesting and a bit ahead of its time. I'd never seen a local copy for sale, and so it was still in the back of my mind when I first discovered Noble Knight. And bingo, they had a copy for a great price. So if there's something you've always had trouble tracking down, check them out. And please use the link found either in the newsletter or on the website or in the description of this video if you're watching on video. Use that. That way, they'll know it's me that sent you. I'll get a little kickback and be able to find another game to bring to your attention. It's a virtuous circle, right? News. As always, there are links to all the news pieces in the newsletter, so go look there if you want more information. The feedback on my idea about doing a bi-weekly show was sparse but positive, so I'll keep that idea on the burner for now. Hopefully go ahead with it, but who knows, we'll have to see. Real news. Vento Nuovo have released Blocks in the East. They're an Italian publisher who are trying to match Columbia with their dedication to block games. There's some real fans of their work on our Discord server channel, so I may be convinced to try them out. Have a look, tell me what you think. DeVere Games sent out a release schedule of all their upcoming titles. I'll be reporting on their España 1936 game soon, and I have Operation Barclay on its way, so check out the list on the website for a ton of new games. Thin Red Line have announced a new set of living rules for The Fate of All, and a link. I know this isn't huge news, but I mention it as I appreciate getting an email when there's something like this available. If I was in the middle of a game or about to start, I'd want to know that there was a new living rules posted, so good on them. Happy belated birthday to Fort Circle Games. They turned 7 in June. To celebrate, they sent out an update on what they're up to and what's in the pipeline, similar to DeVere. Check it out. And finally, Noble Knight is looking for more used RPG stuff, and they've raised their prices and are paying for many items. So now's the time to get rid of your old RPG stuff. Oh, also, I guess that wasn't finally, Neva, I'm not sure how to pronounce that yet. Neva has announced another new game. Man, these guys have really burst onto the scene. The new game is Rebellion and Punishment, and it's a CDG set in the War of the Alpujarras in 16th century Spain. So yeah, check that out. Another new publisher. What's on the table? I just conceded in my online play of Kernstown, a blind sword system game. The system was great as always. We played the first battle and originally had thought to play the second battle as well, but I'm setting that aside until later. The Kernstown battles are at a slightly smaller scale than other blind swords games. Normally you have a chit cup full of division commanders, and then when you pull one, you choose which of that division commander's brigade commanders to activate. But in Kernstown, the cup is full of brigade commanders. When you pull one, that's the brigade you activate. No other choice is possible. I know it seems like a small thing, but it really shaped the game more than I thought it would. Who got pulled earlier made a real difference. And if you had a brigade you wanted to go later, too bad for you if their chit was pulled, they have to go now. In a typical blind swords game, in such a situation, you may have been able to activate one of the other brigades first and tried to wait on the one you wanted to go later. It was still a good game, but it was just missing a bit of the juice that I've come to expect from blind swords. New games to the collection. Well, a relatively light list this time. Well, not light given how heavy the first item is. The first thing was The Greatest Day, Utah Beach. This is a monster. Feels like about a 15-pound box. It cost an arm and a leg, but given MMP's reluctance to reprint things, in 2 years I'll probably be able to sell it for an arm, a leg, and a kidney. So there's that. From Compass, Flanks of Gettysburg, Little Round Top, and Culp's Hill. This was a pre-order, and I gotta say, the initial buzz is not good. The rules are apparently a mess. Tons of questions on BGG, but no appearance of the designer, John Paniski, that I've seen. Compass has replied, though, on BGG, and they keep saying that they're working on living rules, so we'll see. I hope it works, because it's supposed to be playable in an evening, and that was really attractive for a Civil War battle game to me. Warriors of England, The War of the Roses. This was the game in the latest Special Ops mag from MMP. It's apparently based on the older Warriors of God game, which was set in the 100 Years' War. This new one is set in the Wars of the Roses, obviously. I had a blast with the previous game. It requires that you be open to crazy, crazy swings of luck, but if you are, it's awesome. I'm hoping the new one lives up to the old one. And then finally, Fire in the Sky, the Great Pacific War, 1941 to 45. This is a game I'd been wanting for a while, and I found a fellow Canuck who had it on his BBG sale list. No, BGG sale list. There you go. So finally, it's mine to try. Book reviews. Well, I was delighted to receive a review copy of Rodger MacGowan's new book, as I was certain to purchase it in any case. I've loved his art since I started in the hobby in 1977, which is just 1 year after Rodger did his first cover art commission, the Russian campaign for Avalon Hill. I love Rodger's art, so I won't be talking about whether or not it's good, but rather about what I like about it. And I'll talk about the book as a book. So consider this a book review rather than an art review. The book is a big coffee table type book, as you'd expect for an art book, filled with color plates of his work. It's hefty and solid, and the color prints are vivid. Definitely more vivid than some of the scuffed copies I have on my game shelves. Rodger's taken an interesting approach in that the book is an autobiography and an art book at the same time. It starts with a bit of family history and his own education. I was delighted to find out that he was involved in theater in college, not just designing sets, but writing and directing as well. He was majoring in both theater and graphic arts. Of course, it was the latter that won out over time. After graduating, his first job as an artist was for Vortex magazine, a sci-fi fan publication in the 1970s. He did his first covers there, as well as illustrations for articles. That magazine folded in 1975, right around the time he was ready to move forward with his first life-defining project, Fire and Movement magazine. He'd been playing war games since high school, so this was a dream that would unite his gaming hobby with his graphics skill and everything he'd just learned about magazine layout and design while at Vortex. For newer people in the hobby, it's easy to remember Rodger as one of the foremost artists in our tribe, but his first huge contribution was Fire and Movement. It was the first wargaming magazine not tied to a game publisher, an independent journal with independent reviews, news, and articles on strategy, variants, and anything else they could think of. Rodger notes that when the first issue was ready to go, he still had no subscribers nor a distributor, so he sent promo copies to all the wargame publishers that he knew. The response was enthusiastic, and the magazine was on its way. One very special response to the magazine came from Redmond Simonson, legendary graphic artist from SPI. He sent back his copy with notes throughout indicating ways to improve the layout and the magazine in general, and so began a friendship between the two best artists in the business. Eventually, it became so successful that he had to hire someone else to run it, as it was too much to do on top of his day job. He was now working in television. Like so many folks in our hobby, Rodger kept a day job on top of all his hobby contributions for many years. A while later, he sold the magazine to Steve Jackson Games, and it in turn gets sold to Alan Emmerich. It finally folds in the mid-'80s, but it was during the Fire and Movement years that Rodger began to get commissions from publishers for game box covers and illustrations. As mentioned earlier, his first was in 1976 for the Russian campaign for Avalon Hill. It's still a revered cover, so much so that when GMT printed a 5th edition of that game last year, they had Rodger rework the original cover art to fit the new sized box. So much of what makes Rodger's work remarkable is in that first cover. Bold use of color, montage, pointillism, interesting lettering, and just sheer drama. And maybe overlooked now, but he used Russians on that cover. 99% of the Russian front games up to that point used strictly Germans on their covers. The next year, he does Squad Leader for Avalon Hill, another iconic cover that ranks with Simonson's Panzerblitz as the best covers of all time, in my opinion. As well, the original Squad Leader scenario cards had his pen and ink drawings as illustrations rather than the photos now used in ASL. These drawings were an order of magnitude more compelling than the stock photos now used. He then started doing covers for GDW and Yaquinto, among others, including the great Panzer, Armor, and 88 covers for Yaquinto. And he was still working for Avalon Hill. There are a ton of amazing covers from 1976 to 86, his Avalon Hill period. Get the book just for those covers, you won't regret it. The relationship, though, started to fall apart over his cover for Up Front. Rodger originally designed a cover with an American GI, but Avalon Hill said they wanted a German on the box as Germans sold better. This was a period when there was still a lot of fetishization of the German army and particularly the SS. So Rodger redid the cover with a German soldier complete with SS runes on his collar tabs. AH received a fair bit of blowback for the cover from folks offended by the SS soldier. In Rodger's telling of the event, Avalon Hill took no responsibility for the decision to have that on as the subject matter for the cover and said it was the artist's decision. So he continued to work for Avalon Hill, but the relationship was somewhat broken. In his book, he shows the original sketch of the American GI for that cover. He kept it around, and years later he ended up finally using it for another iconic game, Combat Commander. The book goes into some detail on his history with Hobby Japan, a publisher that's still somewhat obscure to us on this side of the Pacific. At the same time, he was doing covers for Campaign magazine and Wargamer magazine. He was seemingly everywhere, and the book documents this comprehensively. In 1990, he joined fledgling GMT as vice president and art director, and instantly gave the company a brand identity and a professional look. It's during this period that he starts making maps, counters, and even covers using the new technology, desktop computers. This isn't my favorite period of his artistic work, but his compositions are still apparent, and his style as well. And given the state of computer graphics at the time, it's fair to say he was pushing the envelope. And then, of course, by 1992, he started his second great magazine, C3I, which is still in operation today. In the book, he lays out some of his goals with the new magazine, the first of which I found fascinating. He wanted to create a magazine that did not date, something that could have a very long shelf life rather than being completely of the moment. He wanted to be like an extension of GMT's box games, and they printed scenarios and variants, including new counters. And of course, by issue 14, it had started to publish a game of its own in each issue, much like the magazine we still see today. As with the pages devoted to Fire and Movement, the pages detailing the history of C3I are filled with tidbits of wargame history and the names of many other great contributors to the hobby. The last large section of the book details all the covers, maps, counters, and illustrations he did for GMT, sometimes with a note as to where he got the idea or a conversation he had with a designer. And then at the back of the book, there's a chronology of all his work from the time he founded RBM Studios in 1974 and an index of every game he worked on. It's a huge list, let me tell you. And then finally, a few pages of art from his student years and from non-wargaming projects that he worked on throughout the years. It's a great book about a great artist. So what makes me think this art is great? Well, there's a few things. His use of color, his pointillism, his use of montage, his good taste in stripping away everything that's not needed in an image, and of course, more than anything else, his sense of drama. Perhaps it's just that our color palettes are similar, but I just love his use of color, particularly his oil paintings. They're often very deep blues and bright reds that grab you. Everything is so vibrant. The cover he did for Avalon Hill's version of Panzergruppe Guderian is a perfect example. We have an ominous blue sky fading to orange on the horizon. The half track is in the foreground. The half track in the foreground sits on a background of deep orange wheat. And then there are the three bright red arrows backgrounding the drawing of Guderian on the front half. all that color is bound to grab your eye. Or then the famous upfront cover. It's got a similar dramatic use of color. Or the color for Hobby Japan's Operation Market Garden. Such a vibrant palette in these colors done in oils. They're absolutely my favorites. I also mentioned pointillism. It's a technique we've seen in so many of his pen and ink drawings. Think of the squad leader cover and the way he used it to give depth to the central figure's cloth camo covering on his helmet. Or the cover of Anzio, where he gives definition to the face using pointillism. And it's especially effective in his black and white work as the aforementioned illustrations for squad leader scenario cards. As for his use of montage, the main thing here ties in with his taste in stripping away everything that's not needed. We get just what we need, no clutter extending out to the edges of the space. Of course, the Russian campaign was a very early use of montage, so effective. Look at the red box in the lower left. All we see are the two soldiers marching, nothing extraneous. Same with the two snow boots, the two in snow smocks at the bottom. When I think of Rodger's montage sensibility, I think of two broad categories. The first is formal defined montages in the Russian campaign, just discussed, with each image in a distinct block or area. And we see this thing much later in Twilight in the East, or on the cover of the ASL rulebook with its use of the 4 images from the original 4 squad leader games and gamettes. But much more familiar is a looser and yet more focused montage where images are not in defined areas but almost bleed into one another. Often these pieces feature a single figure or maybe sometimes 2 at the top, with a montage of supporting images leading into the main image or providing background. His cover for Iron Bottom Sound for Hobby Japan is a stunning example. The Japanese admiral with the flag behind him rising out of the ships coming towards us in the foreground in the moonlight. Or how about Paths of Glory? That's an iconic cover. A slightly different arrangement, but we still have the central figure supported on both sides by the active troops in silhouette. Or his cover for the original cover for the People. Here we have almost an inversion of the layout. The central image is of Federals fighting Confederates, but they're almost in silhouette. To the left and right side, on each side we see political leaders, Lincoln and Davies, military leaders, Grant and Lee, and then a regular soldier of each side. In all of these montages, he manages to bring so much extra to the page that we get with a single image. He's trying to point to more than just one thing. And then there's that key distinction of his work, drama. All the previously mentioned techniques are in service of providing a sense of drama. Think of the cover for Flat Top for Avalon Hill. In the lower half of the image, we have what I assume are American carriers steaming toward us. The background sky is deep blue, but has the Japanese red rising sun superimposed. From the right, we see Japanese planes diving, and to the left, we have close-ups of 2 Japanese pilots. Their faces worried but determined. There's a tension in their faces, but there's also a kind of tension between the 3 elements of the picture. Or how about the cover for Panzerkrieg? This is an image that he's repurposed recently for Trevor Bender's Curse campaign in C3I. So everything about this painting is active. The burning buildings with a deep red fire in the background, the Tiger tank kicking up dust in the middle, and then even though the machine gun crew in the foreground isn't moving, their bodies are tense, active, ready for action. As I said, I'm a giant fan of Rodger's art, and given I started wargaming for real in 1977 and Rodger started doing covers in 1976, I feel like his art has been a constant companion for my whole life as a wargamer. I bought Squad Leader when it first arrived in 1977, and Rodger's art was no small part of what got me to take it from the shelf. I'd yet to read the General magazine or any other publication, so shelf appeal was a big influence. Of course, Rodger's art also got me to buy The Guns of August, a game I really disliked and the first game that I ever sold out of my collection. So I guess it cuts both ways. You tricked me on that one, Rodger. For those of us that have spent more than a decade or 2 in the hobby, this book is going to bring back a lot of memories. And for anyone interested in art and design, it's a no-brainer. Have a good look at the work of art of a giant. Okay, now let's have a look at the game we discussed a fair bit last episode, Bonaparte's Eastern Empire by Andrew Rourke of Form Square Games. Form Square provided me with a review copy. I'm very grateful for that. Not many games model Napoleon's excursions to Egypt in 1798, so this game felt fresh to me before I even played it. And I'm happy to say it has several fresh mechanics that only reinforce that feeling. So look for all the new ideas in this game. If you'd like a detailed look at the components, look for it in my YouTube channel. I did an unboxing. For this overview, I just want to focus mostly on what's new about the game with just a brief description of how it all works. The map is an area map depicting the Eastern Mediterranean a bit of an abstract way, and then the Egyptian coast, part of the Syrian coast, and then an inset set of areas along the Nile going all the way back to Luxor. Each map space has a number indicating the number of dice you get to roll to try to move out, but more on that later. There's a few cities on the map, or as he describes them, built-up areas. Each of these gives a variable number of victory points to whoever holds it. Victory points come into play if neither side scores a strategic victory. There are circular counters for leaders and square counters for the units. The units are infantry, cavalry, and artillery, all with varying strength points. I don't think this game tells us what one strength point really represents in terms of numbers of men or anything like that. It's more of a case, this is an infantry 5 counter. If it takes a loss, I'll replace it with 2 infantry 2 counters, something like that. It's more of the counter strengths are more just comparable between the armies. There are 2 copies of the circular leader counters. One goes on the board where the leader is, and one goes on the status level track to note the leader's current glory points. As well, more on that later. Each side gets a command card which lays out all their leaders in the chain of command. For example, on the French card, Napoleon is the overall army leader. Beneath him are leaders like Kleber and Desailly and Baum, and these are, I suppose, they're kind of like corps commanders. And then below each of these corps commanders, there's often a subordinate commander, a division commander, if you will. Finally, there's a combat results board and an events clock board. So that's the components. There are setup instructions that tell you to place the initial Ottoman and Mamluk forces on board, as well as setting out some Bedouin raiders and the 3 different fleets for the French who are about to invade. The game is played in 3 broad phases. The first 2 are brief, the third is the meat of the game. Phase 1 is Napoleon sailing to Egypt. The French have 3 squadrons of ships and secretly record which squadron contains the actual invasion force. The British have Nelson's fleet. The French try to move their fleets across the Med to land the invasion on the Egyptian coast, and Nelson tries to intercept. If Nelson successfully intercepts, the fleets of both sides are removed. The French land, but with a reduced force. If the French do land without being intercepted, they'll have a bigger force, but both fleets will still stay on board, and Nelson will be joined by 2 more British fleets. This all happens in the second phase, called the disembarkation phase. Historically, Nelson just missed catching the invasion, and Napoleon landed with his full force. Finally, there's the conquest phase. This is the heart of the game, where the French force will try to take control of all the built-up areas on the map, as well as delivering a special unit, the Savants, to the Valley of the Kings, deep down on the Nile. If they accomplish all this, they win a strategic victory instantly. The Allies win their strategic victory if they control both Cairo and Alexandria with either British or Ottoman units. These cities are originally held by the Mamluks, but both are likely to fall early to the French, especially Alexandria. If neither side can achieve their strategic victory conditions, then the winner is determined at the end of the game by victory points. How the units move and fight are where the first interesting mechanic comes in. Let's start with the heart of the game, the glory system. Whenever a leader enters the game, you roll to find out how much glory he has to spend. The amount and type of roll is different for each leader. For example, Kleber will get a lot. He gets 14 points plus the roll of 4 dice 6. Compare this to Manu, who gets just a simple 2 dice 6 worth of glory. Designer Andy Rourke describes glory as a combination of a leader's skill and luck. Having each leader have his own formula for their opening amount of glory is a great way to rate the different leaders, and also to sort of assure that no 2 games will be exactly the same. I noted that you don't roll for a leader's glory until he enters play. That's important because it means you won't know how much glory a leader has until you decide to use him. This is where the command chart mentioned earlier comes into play. When the French enter play, everyone is under Napoleon, and his is the only counter on the board and the only glory counter initially on the track. But as his subunits break off and go in different directions, you roll for them. And when a subunit has its subunit break off, that's when you roll for that third level unit. So that's how the glory points are assigned to each leader. But what are they used for? In this game, you roll both to move and to fight. So we'll start with movement. As I mentioned earlier, every area on the board has a number, and that's the number of dice you get to use to roll to try to activate your units in that area to move out. The numbers range from 1 to 4. You'll need to roll a 5 or a 6 on one of the dice you roll to be successful. So if you're an area rated 4, you can roll 4 dice and you'll probably get a 5 or a 6 fairly easily. But if you're on a 1 or a 2 rated space, you're more likely to fail. In any case, if you do fail and you have a leader in that space, this is where you can spend the glory points to re-roll the dice. 1 glory point per die re-rolled. If you still fail, well, then you're stuck there. You only get 1 re-roll chance. You'll place a momentum marker and on that force to show that they can't be activated again this turn, and then play passes to your opponent. But if you're successful, you move your units out the 1 space in any direction, and then you select another area to activate, either the one you just moved or another one. Keep going until you fail and have to place one of those momentum markers. I guess I should explain those momentum markers a bit. At the beginning of each turn, both sides roll 4 dice, and for each 5 or 6 they roll, they get a momentum marker. They can use the glory points of their overall commander to re-roll if they wish to try and get another momentum marker. Once each side has its number of markers, the side with the most goes first, ties going to the French. During play, whenever you place a momentum marker, place shifts to your opponent, and then when they place a marker, shifts back to you, and so forth. Once both players are out of markers, that turn is over. So anyway, back to movement. If you move a force into a space with an enemy force, a battle will take place. So this contains another interesting design mechanic. Both sides total up how many strength points they have. You get 1 point per infantry, 2 per cavalry, and 3 per artillery. And then you go to the combat table. It's got several columns with different amounts of strength points across the top. So columns for like 1 to 3 points, 4 to 10 points, all the way up to like the last column on the right is for 21 or more points. Whereas the rows correspond to what each force might be. There's a single roll for all the French forces, but for the Allies it's a bit different. There's a column for the British troops if they're led by a commander, and the same for the Ottomans led by a commander, but then there's also columns for the British if they don't have a commander, or for the Ottomans if they don't have a commander, and then a single troop for the Mamelukes. So you cross-index your number of strength points from the top across with the type of force you have. And the chart will tell you what is the minimum number you need to roll on 4 dice to have your hit score, and how many hits you get for each 4 and 5 you roll. So you're going to get to roll 4 dice, again with 5s and 6 being successful. The French row is the strongest, but the British row with a commander is very close. The Ottoman and Mamluk rolls are considerably worse. So both sides roll their 4 dice. If either side is led by a commander, they can spend glory to re-roll any misses. Any commanders with glory left can then force the other side to re-roll hits by again spending glory. Once all the re-rolls are done, you check to see if either side has passed that total threshold needed to score the hits. And if so, then you look on the chart to see how many hits they inflict. Both sides take losses, and the side that took the most losses must break off, meaning they retreat to an adjacent space. If the defender won the battle, then the attacker breaks off and then places a momentum marker and play passes the defender. If the attacker wins, then they can activate the same space again or any other space and keep moving and fighting until they finally lose momentum. This combat system does a ton of work in this design. Say we have a French force attacking an Ottoman force with an Ottoman leader. Both sides have 10 strength points. The French only need to roll a 13 or greater to have their hits count, whereas the Ottomans have to roll an 18 or greater to have theirs count. If the French do score hits, 6s score 4 hits and 5s score 3 hits on this column, whereas if the Ottoman scores hits, 6s score only a single hit and 5s don't score any. So you can see in this way, a smaller French force can be vastly outnumbered by the Ottomans and still succeed, which of course is what happened in real life. Of course, the other side of the coin is that the French only have the troops they start the game with and are likely to receive very little to nothing in the way of reinforcements, whereas the Mamluks and the Ottomans start with large forces and they do get reinforced. And of course the British enter as well. So it's a classic quality versus quantity fight. The combat I've described is regular, out in the open combat. There's also sieges. They work exactly the same in general, but with a couple of tweaks. The big one is that there's only a single round of combat per turn in a siege. The loser does not have to break off. Instead, a momentum marker is placed on the space, and the space can't be activated again until the next turn. In subsequent turns, cavalry can no longer be used, and as well, it should be noted that Mamluks can never take shelter in a built-up area, so they can never be besieged. They always have to fight regular combat. So, as you've probably surmised, the game is really all about the leaders and their glory. You'll be re-rolling or demanding re-rolls all the time and fretting about how much glory you have left to spend. Once a leader has no glory left, he's said to be exhausted. He can still lead troops, but he can no longer re-roll. So, this third phase of the game has the French trying to grab all the VP areas if possible, and if not, they must at least hold on to Cairo and Alexandria to deny the British, and then of course make sure they have more VP than the Allies. As you may have guessed, every French unit is precious, as you're going to need them all the way to make it to the end. And making it even more difficult, the French can only control a VP space by having a leader or a combat unit there to garrison it. So every spot you take, you have to leave someone behind. This can be a good use for exhausted leaders, I suppose, though they aren't much use in defense if the Allies counterattacked. Okay, so that's the guts of the game. But one question is still out there. How many turns are there? Well, if neither side accomplishes their total victory conditions, how are you going to know when the game ends, right? This is the final really clever mechanic. There's this thing called an event clock. Every turn, other than the first turn, starts with a roll of the dice and a look at the event clock for a random event. The event clock is in 4 rows of 6 columns. The rows correspond to how many dice you have that you'll get to roll to generate the event. At first, you just roll 1 die and you'll get an event from the first row. These events may bring more Mamluks or Ottomans on board, or maybe trigger things like making it possible for Napoleon returning to France. Some of them are repeatable, meaning if you roll that again, you'll do exactly the same event. But some of them are one-time events. You do that event, then you place a tile over that event with a new event on it for the next time it's rolled. And then some of the events are going to say something like, if you rolled this on the 1 die roll, immediately activate 2 dice and roll again on the 2 dice roll. This is how we move up the chart. And so from then on, we roll 2 dice for events, making events 2 to 12 possible. And then at some point, we're going to get an event that pushes up to 3 dice, and events 3 to 18 are possible. And then finally 4 dice, and events 4 to 24 are possible. Once we're rolling with 4 dice, there's an event that triggers the end of the game. This is how it ends. It's number 14, so it's very likely to happen soon, though there's no guarantee of that. Once that happens, the game is over, and you count up the victory points to determine the winner. I gotta say, I love this event clock thing, probably because I really enjoy games that have a variable, unknown amount of turns rather than a set amount. As the Allies, you may be very close to conquering both Cairo and Alexandria. You just need a little more time to bleed the French, but you don't know how many turns you've got left. How much glory do you spend if you don't know how many turns you're going to have? Very fun stuff indeed. So that's pretty much how it all works. Again, if you want a closer look at the components, check out my unboxing video. And if you haven't heard it yet, check out the previous podcast episode, number 35, for my interview with designer Andy Rourke. He provides plenty of historical color when describing different parts of the game. I've really enjoyed my time with this game, and I'm glad it's a system that's going to see at least 2 more games, and hopefully many more. The only thing I really need right now is a Vassal module so I can try play by email as well. Finally, bouquets. Well, here's to Andrew H., who made the very first purchase from my merchandise page. He got himself a lovely camping mug with the Pushing Cardboard logo on it. He broke it in with an inch of bourbon. Good man. If you're interested in the same thing, stop by the website and search for swag or merch, and you'll find a few goodies to wear. Parting shots. Anyone else feel like there's too many games and not enough time? I'm sure I'm not alone in that. We truly live in a time of abundance for our hobby. But that means many of us are busy playing something new all the time and not really giving a single game a half dozen plays before moving on. For me, this has become doubly true once I started the podcast. I'm either learning a new game or renewing my acquaintance with an old one each episode, often 2 per episode. That's certainly a big part of why I rarely do reviews, but rather overviews. I really only feel comfortable reviewing a game if I've played it several times, whereas in an overview, I can describe how it works and give an educated opinion as how I think it's going to play over time. But I do miss diving deeper into a single title. The closest I generally come is constantly playing ASL, but even then it's with a different scenario each time, or Blind Swords, again, with a different game each time. I'd like to pick a game each year from now on and try to play it over and over. Just part of the rotation, but play just one game mixed in with all the others that I play for the year. I don't know. I can't say that I'm going to do it. I'm not really one for sticking to resolutions. I hope I try, but you can tell by my waistline I'm not the best at that. Finally, thanks to those who have become supporters of Pushing Cardboard. If you'd like to become a supporter, there are links on the website, or you can join through my YouTube channel. And thanks as well to those who take the time to use my affiliate links when shopping at Noble Knight Games. I really appreciate it. And a special thanks to patrons David S. and Michael S., my first 2 monthly patrons. So, that's it for another episode of Pushing Cardboard. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe and whatever else they let you do there. If you're listening to the podcast, I hope I've made your commute or your mowing the grass or your bike ride that much better. Until next time, happy gaming.